Maayong adlaw. Welcome to Season 3 of Pilipinx in Wellness. I'm your host, Cheryl Sampson Ramirez. In our last episode, we spoke with Nelson Raboy and Jordan Maxamana to explore the world of cycling and wellness. I know that I personally learned a lot from that episode and hope that you did too. This month, we're launching into the second episode of our physical wellness trilogy, which I think is a good follow-up, as we interview married athletes, Dr. Gina Dapul-Hidalgo and Raniel Hidalgo. Before we begin, we'd like to mention that we uphold and honor the safe space to share. We ask everyone to pose comments and questions on our platform in a peaceful and respectful manner. Our pre-recorded episodes are accessible through our Pilipinx in Wellness YouTube channel. The audio recordings are available via Apple Podcasts and Spotify. All views discussed are for informational and educational purposes only. It is not meant to be medical advice. Always consult with your healthcare practitioner for your particular condition, especially before starting any exercise or new health program. For this episode, again, I'd like to introduce our guest speakers, Dr. Gina Dapul-Hidalgo and Raniel Hidalgo. Welcome to the podcast, Hidalgos.
Hey, Cheryl.
Thanks,
Thank you
Cheryl.
for having us.
Thank you for being on. We're excited this season to expand globally and invite you both on as you are our first guest from Maryland, more so the DC area, from my understanding. Am I correct?
Yes.
DC's about a 20-minute drive on a good day from where we are, so we'll aim that.
Sweet. Well, we can't wait to hear more of the East Coast perspectives on our podcast. We'd like to typically open our episodes with one of the first questions you're asked when someone finds out you're Pilipinx or Filipino. So let's start with, where's your family from in the Philippines, and where are you currently streaming from, in case that's different from where you're residing? And now, I was going to say, too, I'm fortunate to know you two personally and know that you're not from originally the D.C. area, so feel free to share where you both are also originally from.
Okay. So I'm actually was born in Brooklyn and raised in New Jersey. And currently, yes, we are in the Maryland, D.C. local area.
Sweet.
Parents?
Oh, parents, yes. So my mom is from Pangasinan and my dad is from Batangas.
Nice. And then where in Jersey did you grow up, Gina?
I grew up in a town called Piscataway. So for those who know, it's actually where Rutgers University is based out of, their main campus. So it's central New Jersey, about an hour from New York.
Great. What about you, Raniel?
Yeah, so it's a little jarring when you said East Coast, because I'm originally a West Coast guy. I've been here so long that, yeah, I guess it fits. So I'm originally from San Diego, grew up in Southern California. And my mom is from a town called Navacan in Ilocos.
Okay.
And my dad is from a town called Lawak in Pangasinan. So I grew up in Ilocano house.
Nice. I had to ask if your parents knew each other because you both mentioned that you have family in Pangasinan, yeah?
Yes. But no, they don't know each other.
Yeah. we checked. they don't. No.
And Raniel, I know like San Diego has also different neighborhoods. Where in San Diego are you from?
So from the South Bay. So originally from San Isidro and Chula Vista.
Sweet. Yeah, I mean, I got cousins in Chula Vista, so I'm like,
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
know them.
Probably. We probably hit the same taquerias, so, you know.
Right. Yeah, I'll have to ask how the Mexican food compares now that you're in the DC area.
That's a different
Should I
podcast.
skip that question? Skip. Now, I, as well as our listeners, have a lot to learn from you both in regards to triathlons and marathons. And here's a fun fact. There was actually a moment in time when I dreamed about being a triathlete, but the reality is that I don't enjoy running, and nor do and even after taking swimming lessons as both an adult and a child, I'm still not a strong swimmer. I'm actually terrified by like when I go into the ocean. If I can't touch my feet on the sand, that's the furthest I'll go. So, Raniel, in the musical theater world, they would call you a triple threat if you could dance, act, and sing, which we know many in our community are capable of doing out there. However, in the triathlon world, you're a triple threat in your own right with the ability to compete in running, swimming, and cycling. So tell us about your origin story, starting off with when did you start training and competing? So we'll start with that question.
Sure. So let me tease out the triple threat comment, right?
Yeah.
So when I think of triple threat, I'm thinking of someone that's actually good at three different things.
Yeah.
So to be clear, as a triathlete, I'm competent in three different things, right? Which is really what you need to kind of get through it. So with respect to the origins of the sport, for me, I would say that the basis of triathlon is really running. If you ask most triathletes that continue to compete, we all started off as runners, right? So it kind of falls into the category of endurance sports. So I started running in my late 20s for a good 5 years, all kinds of distances. And it wasn't until one day I was watching television,
Yeah.
and you might have heard of the Ironman
Yeah.
races. And they do a great job marketing their brand to the point where they have dedicated shows where they showcase all of these athletes just learning how to do the race and doing all three sports. And it just caught my attention. And a lot of it had to do with being able to try two other sports in addition to running, right? Because that essentially caught my interest.
Okay.
So like you, though, I was terrified of swimming, right? And
Interesting.
most people getting into the sport
Yeah.
are intimidated by that particular sport.
Right.
Because if you think about it, it's the one event that you can actually hurt yourself, right? And if you kind of panic.
Right.
But in terms of how I got into it, a lot of it had to do with just finding time to learn, getting access to a lot of YouTube videos, being welcomed into the triathlete community because they very much encourage a lot of beginners to kind of join the sport, and taking a couple of swim lessons. And ultimately, I was competent enough to get through the swim, right? And then ultimately get
Wow.
into the bike and then get into the run. So that's how I got into it. And it's been close to almost 11 years now since I started doing it.
Wow. I didn't realize that you learned how to swim in order to be a triathlete. That's pretty amazing.
Right. And I think to your audience, for anyone that may be interested, all you really need, right, is a bike, some running shoes, and access to a pool, whether it's a YMCA, someone's backyard, right, a backyard pool. And the trick to getting into swimming is just learning how to be comfortable and to just pace yourself. And once you're able to do that, you kind of learn a little bit of technique. And like most triathletes,
Yes.
they don't like the swim. That's why it's the first event. You want to get through it, and then the rest
I
of
didn't
it
know that.
is biking and swimming.
Wow.
Right.
Now, it's funny when you were saying that you started running in your 20s, like the immediate joke stirred in my head was like, were you running from someone or were you running towards Gina?
So the right answer is towards her,
Thank
obviously.
you. Yeah. Right.
But there's also kind of the health aspect to it. Right?
Yeah.
The funny thing is your metabolism starts to go in your late 20s. At least for me, I wasn't lucky enough to continue eating the same foods that I would always eat, and I needed a way to be able to just get that cardio in, right, and ultimately find ways of being able to kind of relax and kind of decompress. And running was a good way of doing that.
Wow.
So it kind of maintains the fitness during that time frame.
And 10 years is pretty impressive. So you've been a triathlete for the past 10 years.
That's right.
That's wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
10 years and still
I'm
going.
learning, folks. Like, don't think that I had pre-interviewed them about any of us before. I'm really learning with all of y'all. What about you, Gina? Tell us about your origin story. And you're not a triathlete, are you?
No, not at all. The swim is definitely not for me.
Yeah.
As I still take lessons to learn and stuff. But yes, so how my story started was actually quite personal because I was working and doing my training in Brooklyn, New York. I was in residency at the time, and I actually developed asthma. So that's when I first had it. I didn't have it growing up, but living in inner city and all this, I developed it in my mid-20s. And what happened was I saw a doctor who then told me when I said, oh, I'm interested in, doing long distance running. The doctor told me, oh, running is not for everybody. And long distance running is not for everybody. So I was like, oh, really? And instead of taking that as I'm going to stop running because somebody told me not to, I'm actually the type of person to say, you told me I can't do something, I'm going to
Watch me.
So, and I was interested in it. I just heard about it from relatives, and, I think maybe Raniel had already done some 5Ks and things like that. By the time it was 07, or maybe even done like his first marathon. So I ended up signing up for a half marathon. It was in New York City in Central Park. It was actually an all women's marathon, half marathon, and trained for it. And, that was my reason for getting into running. It was to prove to somebody that having a diagnosis of asthma was not going to stop me from being an athlete. And, I played field hockey growing up and was a dancer and all this, but for somebody to tell you can't do something, it really just pushes you to say, oh no, I'm going to prove to you that I did this. And I didn't pick like a 5K or anything. I was like, let's just do a half marathon.
Yeah.
So my first half marathon was in 2009. And again, I was diagnosed around 07. And yes, so it was in Central Park. We ran around the loop that's up in the city. And it was really what I remember of it was that it was this big accomplishment where to say, wow, trained for a couple months and actually completed it and crossed the finish line, which is always how you want to finish if you can, finishing upright, and getting that medal. And really, for everybody who does some type of run or some type of event, there's always a story behind it. So if there's, 1,000 runners or 2,000 or 40 or 50,000, it's so interesting to know that there's a reason why people do this and what their why is. Like, what's your reason for training all these months and then putting it out up there when you actually have the event? So that was the beginning of my, my running journey. And since then, it's progressed into different distances and a few more half marathons and, one full. But it was, 2009 was my first half.
Now, were you also in your 20s?
Yes.
Okay. So both of you started running in your 20s. You weren't on track or cross country in high school or?
No.
Wow.
Not at all.
Okay. And so you were saying, was it the swimming part that intimidates you from doing a triathlon, or Gina, or is that for you, or?
Yes. So swimming is not my strong suit. I've taken lessons, and even in a pool, it's very challenging, but Raniel's experience even in open water, which is what they call, right? Like ocean and lakes, is a whole nother world of swimming. So I could probably do it if I just kind of floated back and, but nothing where it's like professional freestyler.
I need to give her a why, right? And then maybe we can get you into triathlon.
Oh, yes.
Nice. Okay. Well, I just wanted to say I'm in awe, seriously, of many of our podcast guests who juggle so many things and still find ways to prioritize their own health and wellness. Now, what I know from you both is that you have full-time jobs, correct? And you both are parents of twins, which is amazing. And I want to know, when do you find time to train? And what does your training and preparation look like throughout the year? So, do you, both, are you part of a community, or do you train together? How do you find time to really prepare for all these marathons and triathlons that you participate in?
So good question. And, actually how it works out for us is that we're able to squeeze this in the morning. And so we wake up really early in the morning, anywhere from 5 to 5:30. And so for me, in terms of running, so I'll use my marathon that I did in October as an example. So how I train for that is 3 short runs during the week. And that's anywhere from 2 miles to 4 miles, maybe, depending on the training program. So you do that 3 days a week during the week, and then what's called a long run on the weekend. So Saturdays, for example, depending on the program, you can build up. So you start at like 4, 6, 8, 10, come back down some weeks, and then go up. So that those runs can run anywhere from, 45 minutes to 2, 3, 4 hours when you get to, 18, 20 miles. Wow. I'm a slow runner. I'm a super slow runner. I'm not somebody who's like fast. So the fact that I can even, think about running these distances is like a huge, hurdle to have come over. So that's typically how a marathon training would be. And, for half marathons, it's the same idea where you do these short runs during the week and a long run on the weekend. And it can still take a couple months to train, but if you're already at a baseline fitness level, then you might be able to train in like 8 to 12 weeks as opposed to, a few long ones. And so I used a program actually called Hal Higdon's running program. He's like a big running coach, and it's free resources online.
How do you how do you spell that, Gina?
It's spelled HALHIGDON.
Okay.
So if you look them up online, it's got a bunch of different training programs. So you can start with your 10Ks or 5Ks and half marathons. And you can start as a novice, which is a beginner level. Or if you've done a few of those already, then he has an intermediate and advanced. So I've done all the novice, and that's my level, just starting off. And, so yeah, I would recommend, if not Hal Higdon's program, there's a bunch of different options in terms of learning how to train.
Now, is that like a kind of program? Is it an audio program or like?
So I think he's got some coaching programs that you can purchase, right? But what I use is just his plan.
Okay.
So you print out like a sheet that says, okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, what your schedule would be in the weekend.
It builds up.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, week to week, like week 1.
So he creates like a regimen
this
for you.
distance. Exactly.
Yeah, so schedule so that it's already set.
Got it.
You know that people have done it, so you're like, oh, okay, if it works, then there's some kind of thing to base your training on.
It's fairly conservative enough for the beginner to just follow here.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he's not very aggressive when it comes to building that base.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really easy for folks to get.
And there's rest days, so you're not running every single day.
Yeah.
You do a long run, and then you take a rest on Monday or Sunday, something like that.
Okay. So you're waking up around 5 o'clock to train, and so what time do you normally go to bed?
Oh, so for me, probably by 10,
Okay.
10:30 Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah.
I guess it would be the same. So a good, 7, 8 hours of sleep.
Okay.
And it depends too on the sun,
Right.
right? So we try to, like right now, the sun is up at 5:30, and it's good to, for me, I'm a morning person, but somebody else might say, oh, I can find time in the evening based on my schedule or after work, and I know people who do that evening train. Okay. For me, I'm just a morning person. I'm like, oh, ready to go? Let's do this. And actually, here's a trick. Because it's hard to train in the morning, I actually sometimes sleep in my clothes.
Yeah, I've done that for work.
So that is one less thing. That's right. One less thing that'll stop you. Because if you're already dressed in it, you're like, okay, I guess I have to go.
Right.
Because it's the getting out of bed and realizing what you're about to do. So if there's things that you can make easier, you're like, oh, I'm here. I just got to put on my shoes and, my gear.
That's a good trick.
We're good to go.
Now, what time do you start work?
Oh, so depends on the day. Sometimes this early 7:30.
Okay.
But other days are typically like 8:30.
Okay, so you'll give yourself maybe an hour to run?
Yes.
Okay, before you start getting
Yes.
ready for like work during the work week. And
Yes, exactly. And so the short runs are the ones on the weekday.
huh.
So that can take anywhere from half hour, 45 minutes.
Okay, and then on the weekends, I'm
Yes.
assuming that you're sharing parental responsibilities when you're going on your run, or
Yes. So also in the morning,
yes.
and I go in the morning. If it's like a 2-hour run, 3-hour long run, then Randall's making breakfast. And
It takes a team.
I come back. Yes, it takes a team, a lot of support. It's a team effort. And when I come back, I'm like, oh, breakfast is ready, which is perfect because you need your protein after
Right.
and longlets.
Wow. And what about you, Raniel? What does your training schedule look like? So I guess you don't train together. So you don't ever run together, or
So to be quite honest, the reason we don't run together is because our kids are still too young to be home
By
alone.
themselves.
If we had a choice, we actually pre-kids. we were
Oh, yeah,
training
we used to
together
train
quite a bit.
and they don't run with
but-
you, do they?
Uh, no.
Not yet.
No, sometimes they've gone
Yes.
on bikes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll get on a bike while you run with them.
Right.
We've done that.
Okay.
And we have pushed them around when they were younger on these running strollers, but that ends up becoming too much of a workout.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
yeah. The
Push it,
three-wheelers.
right. That's a
Yeah.
full commitment.
Yeah.
So, to answer your question, it is tag teaming right at this point. Because of the fact that, training is important to both of us, right? And the health benefits alone are enough for us to just sacrifice for each other to make sure that we can find the time to do this, right? Because we're all better off for it. We come back in a great mood.
Yes.
We have energy.
Yeah.
It is worth the sacrifice
It
of
is,
letting
yeah.
your partner go.
I'll offer to do the laundry when I get back. I'm ready to go.
He's ready to
right?
go. He's
So-
like, oh.
But when it comes to triathlon training, right? So similar to what Gina was describing, you have to develop the base, and you develop that base starting X number of weeks before a race, and that's dependent on the distance, which we can get into a little bit later. But a typical week would essentially include what I call 2 short runs during the week, right? So no more than 20 to 30 minutes, maybe like on a Tuesday, Thursday. Throw in a swim at least one day a week, right, at the pool. And that session can last anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes, just swimming laps and doing drills. Maybe a short bike ride during the week. If you live close enough to work, ride your bike to work. It doesn't have to be a straight workout session. And then similar to the marathon, the weekends are when you do like the longer distance training, right? So on a Saturday, for example, that's when I would do my longer bike rides, anywhere between 25 to 50 miles, depending on what that's going to be.
Yeah.
So that would, be a few hours. And, like Gina, I'm a morning person when it comes to working out. So especially on the weekends, I'm up as early as I can. If the sun is up, then I'm on the road. And it's important, I'm sure your cyclists that you spoke to in your previous podcast deal with this. You want to avoid the cars too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be dangerous.
Totally.
And then on the Sundays when you do the long run. Okay, so you kind of put that all together. So it's a little bit more demanding than just the running training. But as I stated earlier, you get to do 3 different sports, right? And it's, when I grew up, I loved to swim and bike as a kid.
Yeah.
And naturally you just run because you just do that as a kid. So essentially you're kind of a kid again almost,
Yeah.
but there's like a purpose behind
That's what our
it.
cyclist said.
Right, exactly. And the other interesting tidbit of training is as you get closer, triathletes like to do this thing that they call bricks. So if you've never heard of the term brick before, it's essentially you go for a long ride, and immediately after that ride, you actually put your running shoes on and you go for a run.
Oh my god.
So you're actually putting together 2 events together during a training session because of the fact that your legs feel like bricks after a long bike ride, and you have to kind of train the legs to kind of get the blood flowing again so you can run. So you don't want to do that all the time because you'll probably destroy you. So you try to do that maybe a few times before the actual race to prepare. So yeah.
Well, you mentioned also though that you wake up early to start cycling. So how does that work with your parenting schedule then?
So same concept. Like if I'm going on a bike ride, she knows about it a day or two ahead. So like on a Sunday, bike ride from 6 to 10 in the morning.
Right.
So Gina's going to be home with them until I come home. Another thing that I can likely do these days, if folks get into triathlon and they get into cycling, there are things that you can actually set up at home to ride at home. For example, I have a trainer, right? So we can look that up another time, but it's essentially a way of mounting your bike on an indoor trainer, which allows you to kind of spin. It's kind of like an indoor spin. And that still gives you that workout without having to leave, right? So I'll be up in the basement with that, with the kids running around. So.
Okay, got it. Now, when you're training, is there, or maybe on the regular, is there a particular diet that you have to adhere to? I've heard, like, for example, for runners, it's like they eat a lot of carbs, and I don't know if that's what helps build energy. So I know, Gina, you mentioned you were also on a regimen. So is there a particular diet to help you prepare for your meets, or for your marathons or your triathlons?
Yeah, so no particular diet, but exactly what you mentioned, which is carbs.
Yeah.
Usually most of the runners, right, and before big events, you're doing like a carb loading or pasta dinner the night before. So yes, so before long runs, and sometimes definitely the nights before even some short runs, it kind of helps to have a little bit of a pasta, on the side of the dish, or if not a whole pasta meal. It really does give you energy and helps you sustain much longer. And usually, yes, but no diet. Typically, and I've heard everyone has their own thing.
Right.
So I've heard of runners who will have a pint of ice cream, the night before or after a race. It really allows you to eat a lot of different things because because your metabolism is burning, how many hundreds of calories per session.
Or some people also prefer to increase their protein, like protein shakes, or so. So is that, or for runners, like maybe electrolytes. So are those other things that you introduce when you're training or when you're actually competing?
Yes. So
protein's good for recovery, right? Because what happens is with all of the running, you're really breaking down the muscles. I mean, you're damaging your body, right? So you need to recover. So protein kicks in nicely, right, after a long run, after a long ride. Otherwise, as Gina stated, carving up is important, right? Just to have the energy, and depending on what you're doing, nutrition during the event is just as important. I learned this the hard way when I first started running, that water isn't going to cut it when you're going beyond, for example, 5 kilometers.
Okay.
Because you need like an energy drink, something with electrolytes in it.
Right.
Coconut water is a good alternative to Gatorade if you want to avoid sugar. But you need to kind of, not just the diet and preparation during training, but the actual event, come up with a strategy to ensure that you file the calories, right, and the electrolytes to kind of get you.
And then in terms of proteins, do you both lean more towards like red meat, seafood, white, chicken, like to also, like on the regular, like are there certain vegetables that you like to eat to also kind of balance out your systems?
I mean, for me personally, I try to avoid as much red meat as possible.
Yes.
My preference is to stay with fish and chicken.
Yes.
Tuna melts are good for me, right?
But
I don't necessarily think they're great and so easy to do. But protein shakes are excellent as well, right? And be there to kind of get that quick recovery. But I don't necessarily gravitate towards a specific protein regimen. But as Gina stated, because of the fact that you're burning so many calories, you can get that extra chicken right if you eat it, right? Because you can cheat a little bit more.
Yeah, well, how about you, Gina?
I tend to stick more with like seafood, chicken. So I'm a big shrimp, fish, tilapia, salmon. I'll have a little red with over to hamburger occasionally here and there. But for the most part, yeah, love seafood, love chicken.
So no traditional Filipino diets for you both.
We'll throw in like some, chicken adobo. And...
Especially when Lola comes over to meet the kids.
Yes.
Right? I mean, she takes over our kitchen and does all of the dishes.
Right.
Like I said, you can cheat every now and then, Chef. We're not like, we don't have a menu saying, okay, you have to eat this. As long as you're consistent with the amounts, as long as you stick to your training schedule and you're burning the calories, it allows you to kind of be a little bit diverse, but not too much.
Yeah. Got it. Well, thank you both for sharing your training schedule. And I know in particular, I've always been curious to just inquire about if your diet changes when you're also training for marathons or triathlons. Now, aside from training for marathons and triathlons and being parents, you both also have day jobs, right? So what do you both do when you're not running or when you're not parents?
Taking care of kids. So I'm actually a allergist immunologist in the DC area here. So I take care of kids and adults who have allergies, asthma, immunological conditions. So that's my day job.
Nice.
So I am a former military officer. I work in the defense industry as an engineer. And right now I run a business organization for a large defense contractor, which consists of upwards to 24 engineers and program managers. So that definitely keeps me busy.
What kind of engineer are you, Raniel?
I studied electrical when I was in college.
Like my dad. Aw.
Yeah.
Sweet. Cool. And then Gina, I think it's interesting that you're an allergist and you focus also on asthma and immunology because you mentioned that you had a doctor that deterred you from running due to the asthma that you developed. So was there a correlation there between that experience and wanting to pursue this career? And I'm curious, did your asthma ever get in the way of you running your marathons?
Yes, so good question. It has helped me to understand my patients, and it was part of why I went into this particular field in subspecialty. A lot of it had to do with family history and asthma and allergies running in our family. So being able to serve people who are like my titos, my cousins and dads with eczema, allergies, all of that. And what I've found, which is really what drives me now, being an asthmatic myself, is that I can help support patients who have their own personal physical goals. So I have triathlete patients, I have marathon runners, those who are training for their first 5K with asthma. And so my job and role, which is such an honor, is to be able to support them in that with, however I can treat them and different techniques to avoid their allergens, but really to help them reach that goal. So for somebody to say, you can't do that because you have this condition, I'm an example of, no, I have this condition and I can do it. And so it's really something where I'm driven to be able to have the opportunity to treat people so that they can do whatever their goals are. I have those who do century rides, as Nelson and Jordan mentioned last time, so anything you can do, and having a condition does not stop you. If anything, it may motivate you to say, oh, look, I know somebody who's done it and they can, help me be that inspiration of completing it myself. And so in a way, what I can say for me personally is that my asthma has been controlled. So I'm able to have it treated in a way that doesn't trigger my symptoms when I run these long distances. But I do have, the inhaler my rescue inhaler nearby? Should I need to use it? And, actually being very mindful of what the triggers are, right? So for example, if I'm had pollen season as a big thing, like here in the East Coast, spring, in, February, March, April, May, you want to be mindful of running outside, or at least making sure that your breathing is controlled. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago? A couple weeks ago, we had the wildfires here that were coming from Canada. So it was a whole air quality alert. And so if air pollution is your trigger, you definitely want to be mindful. Well, maybe today I don't run outside. Maybe I find a treadmill, or I push my run to a different day, so that you're not putting yourself in a position that's going to make it worse, because you know that that's a trigger, but still allowing you to reach that goal in a safe manner.
I see. Right. So
does that answer your question?
Well, and so you never really had to experience any hindrance from having asthma. You were able, like, along the way when you were training, after your doctor had told you that, did you ever experience any close to being like having attacks, or what was how did you reach that point where you were able to have control over your asthma?
So that's the important part, right? Asthma is something that you will have what we call chronically,
right?
And there are for a long time,
yeah.
And there are things that can trigger it and make it worse,
right.
And things that when you take your medicine or it's under control, keep it under control. And so as long as you can train and run when you're under control, that's the idea. So my suggestion would be, make sure that you do see your healthcare practitioner or your asthma specialist, your pulmonologist, to get that under control so that you're able to accomplish these goals. And in my case, because I'm, able to say, okay, today's the day I'm not going to train, I try not to put myself in a position where I know my asthma is going to act up.
Okay.
So for example, if I'm sick with a cold,
that's
probably not a good time. I might have to push a couple days of training for when I feel better, because that's only going to make me worse until the cold is gone and I'm back to a normal baseline. So again, it's really being mindful of yourself, your body, what makes it so that you're able to continue, and what things kind of hinder you from doing it, and not letting it stop you as long as it's safe.
Yeah. Do you have any also like health conditions or challenges, Raniel, that you have to overcome while training?
I wouldn't say chronic health. However, I am prone to cramping, which is common for folks that do endurance training. It happened to me when I was much younger, doing a half marathon. It showed up on a marathon when I was younger, and occasionally, depending on how hot it is during a triathlon or even training, I may run into it. So unfortunately, and again, I'm certainly not an expert on the physiology behind why it happens, but it is still a mystery, right? According to all the literature I've been reading as to why it occurs. But one thing that I did find that would mitigate the effects would just be diet, right? And just making sure that you are eating appropriately, you are hydrated, you have enough sodium and electrolytes, and that kind of helps ease that. Otherwise, when you're training and you cramp up, you can kind of stop, right, and relax and stretch.
Right.
During a race, you have to somehow power through it and just go. You take the time penalty, I guess. Yes. But in the end, that is something that I kind of have to watch out for.
Got it. Let's move into understanding more about these races and the ones that you've both been involved with. In general, Raniel, you mentioned how watching the Ironman competitions got you into triathlons. Now, between the two of you, you've had a plethora of competitions, from the New Jersey State Triathlon, the New York City, DC, the Love Run Philadelphia half marathons that you've done, Gina. And then Raniel, you've done the Marine Corps marathon, the Cherry Blossom 10 miler. So for those of us who are new to this, what are the distances of each of these races? Because I can tell you, even just doing this interview, I should have done my research about how long the distance is. But I have you here to explain it to me. So, for our listeners that are maybe listening in other countries, maybe if you could also share the imperial or the metric calculations to what these distances are and how are they structured. So, Raniel, you mentioned that earlier that you start off with the swimming, but I'm not quite sure what's after that. So, why don't we start with the distance and then we'll talk about the structure.
Okay. I'm going to have to flip that. I think I need to describe the structure first.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because the distances are actually they correlate to the events, right? So every triathlon is going to be swim, bike, run. That's always going to be the general order for which the events take place. And when you think about the different types of triathlon distances, they fall into two major categories. There's going to be what we call short distance races, and then obviously the long distances. So the short ones, there are two different kinds. One is the sprint triathlon.
Okay.
And that distance would essentially be a 500-meter swim, a 15-mile bike ride, or a 25-kilometer bike ride, and then a 3-mile run, which equates to about a 5K run, right? So I love sprint triathlons. In fact, my first one was a sprint. You can probably train in about 2 months and knock it out in about an hour and a half and be home in time for breakfast, right? So it's a great distance for beginners. The next short distance triathlon is the Olympic distance. So if you watch the Olympics, the Summer Olympics every 4 years, that's what you will see for that particular event. And the distances there are 1,500-meter swim, so likely 3 times the swim distance of the sprint, 25-mile bike run, or 40 kilometers when you're looking at that, and then a 6.1-mile run, which is essentially a 10K.
Oh, gosh.
Okay. Yeah, so a little bit takes a little bit more to get through that, but that summarizes short distance. Now, and then you get into the long distances, right? So we talked earlier about Ironman. That is, Ironman's a brand.
Okay.
So there are a number of other triathlon brands that actually host these races.
Got it.
But long distance are you have the 70.3 distance, which is 70 miles.
Oh my god.
0.3. And then 140.6, which is the full Ironman, right? The full Ironman distance. So the 70.3 is a 1.2 mile swim, almost a 2 kilometer swim, 56-mile bike ride, which is 40 kilometers. I'm sorry, 90 kilometers, and then a half marathon after that, 13.1, right? So, and then you can guess what the full Ironman is. You just double those distances, right? So 140 miles total. So 2.4 mile swim, or 3.9 kilometer swim, 112 miles on a bike, which is 180 kilometers, and then 26.2 mile run at the end of it, which is 42 kilometers.
Wow.
Those two races are, you're committed, right? I mean, a half iron can take anywhere between 5 to 8 or so hours, give or take, and then a full iron can take anywhere between 12 to 16, 15 hours.
Oh my god.
Right? Even longer.
When do they eat or use the restroom?
During the race.
Well, I guess when you're
During
swimming,
the
you
race.
can take a restroom break.
Right.
And
Yes.
no one would know.
Luckily, depending on where the venue is on the bike ride, you'll occasionally find a porta potty or a random tree that you can park your bike on. And yeah.
Wow. I mean, I would want to actually know what is the oldest person to compete these Ironman competitions would, like the age. That would be really interesting to find out.
So it's broken up into age groups, right? So you participate in age groups, and they do have folks well into their 70s and 80s.
That's so inspiring. Yeah. Okay. Now, for the ones that you both have competed in, or participated in. Do you have any favorites, or what were were they all different types of experiences? Tell us more about that for both of you.
I'm gonna go since you just.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to do a 70.3 Ironman. So this is the half Iron distance.
Oh wow.
And this was in Atlantic City, New Jersey in 2017.
That's not too long ago.
And it wasn't too long ago, but it was definitely my favorite. It is the longest. I have yet to do a full 140. But when it comes to the 70.3 Ironman at Atlantic City, it was amazing because of all the work that went into it. Right. For something like that, Gina really had to sacrifice a lot of time.
And the girls were younger.
And our daughters were very young. So she was essentially watching them while I was out on a Saturday tooling around on my bike for hours.
Yeah.
Right. And the cool thing about triathlon is for spectators, you could essentially be in one spot because of the fact that every triathlon race revolves around a central location where all of our athletes' gear is located, to include the bike, the swimming equipment, like your shoes for running. It's an area that we call the transition area. So, if you're watching a marathon, you kind of have to plan where you're going to be to find your loved one as they race through. But in a triathlon, you can essentially be in one area to kind of see the person you're cheering for come back from the swim, like go out on the bike, come back from the bike, go out on the run. And the reason this was fun for me was, this was a destination race. My daughters were there. Gina was there with them, and you find kind of that energy and that motivation to keep going. They're out there with the little cowbells cheering you on, and it was an amazing experience. And again, I will say that all of the races are great because in the end it becomes kind of the reward. Right. It's the reward and for all the work that you put into it, and it becomes a celebration. Right. It's not this daunting thing that you're worried about. It becomes, I can't wait to get there. Can't wait to get through it. Right. I'm certainly not saying that at the very beginning because it's such a daunting thing. It took me about 6.5 hours to complete that race. So,
oh my gosh,
that was a very long one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. But it was a great accomplishment, right? To finish that.
Yeah, what about you, Gina? I wanted to ask, like, what are you eating during that 6 hours?
It's a good question. So I had my food on my bike, to be honest with you. So on the bike, you can actually put a little zipper pouch, and I think I had pierogies that day. Yeah. So we made pierogies. So probably around mile 40 of my bike ride, I'm sitting there, just kind of going through my food, and there are a couple of others.
Know what pierogies
I was going to ask, yeah, maybe if you
My apologies. They're kind of like empanadas, right?
They're Polish.
They're Polish dumplings.
Okay.
Polish dumplings with potatoes. Yeah. So filled with good carbs. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of fueling there. And by the way, maybe a number of athletes that are watching this may know, but we also do gels. They have these energy gels that are easy to consume, easy to put away right into your pocket afterwards, and you get a good dose of calories and carbohydrates.
Got it. So you're eating these pierogies while you're cycling. So that whole myth about eating and and being active, because have you ever heard that? Like because it leads to indigestion. So that's you just debunk.
You got to be careful. My suggestion is don't try a recipe for the first time on race day. Like make sure that your stomach can handle what you're gonna eat, because the last thing you want to do is to have like GI, gastrointestinal issues in the middle of a race. Yeah. So luckily I knew my stomach could handle the pierogies on the bike.
Yeah.
The trick is to not crash.
Right. And you, Gina, did you have any favorites from the marathons, half marathons that you've done, or? Yeah.
So I would say My favorite is the Marine Corps Marathon that I did in October. I wouldn't say that it was the time I finished it because it took me, I did have some injury towards the end of the race. And for those who are athletes, I had what's called IT band syndrome. So it's called the iliotibial band, and it can cause knee pain. So in different races that I've done, it's started in different parts of the race. And the IT band causes you to not be able to run. So you actually feel knee pain while you're running. So you have to stop. And I think I felt it around mile 18, was it? It was after I saw you guys. So between mile 18 to 26.2, I had this knee pain. And so I say this because it was a struggle. I was walking probably for the last couple miles, or I'd run and then walk. And so it's something where all the training that went into it, which for this marathon took me 6 months to train for, I was like, well, I'm going to finish this. And it doesn't matter how long it takes, and my motivation for having done it, like I was going to complete it. And so I finally did it. And it wasn't the time that I wanted. I thought I would do much better because I did really strong for the first half. But in the end, after I sat with it and I was just like, oh, and it was a little sad for the next 2-3 days. I was like, wow, I'm not really that happy with it. I was a little disappointed. It took me a couple more days to realize, wow, you actually did 26.2 miles, and give yourself credit for that. And, in the community, a lot of people were like, well, you PR'd, and PR means personal record. And because I've never done it before, it was a personal record. Yeah. And so, in reflecting on it, there was, my reason for having won that particular race, and, seeing the family, as Randa said, like when you see your family or those supporting you, if you're fortunate enough to have people there that day, it was this experience. And we always make it as best of an experience as we can. So depending on what destination we go to, if we go to Philly or Atlantic City, we get a hotel room the night before, even though technically we could have driven to DC in a half hour at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
But we get a hotel, we make an experience, we have pasta dinner, an Italian restaurant, pre-race night. And the whole experience was, wow, all of that hard work, which I never thought I could run a marathon. And this is why it's so interesting that you asked us to do this, because never in my life, even if you asked me, a year and a half ago, would you have done a marathon? I was like, no, I'm kind of good with my, halves, 13.1 miles. There was just something that drove me to do it last year. And now looking back on it, I'm like, wow, I actually did that and would have never, ever thought. And I'm telling you this when I say that when I started training for the marathon, even 2 miles was really hard for me. I would run 2 miles. That was part of my schedule. And I was like, oh my goodness, how can I do this like 13 more times? Like, It sounds so daunting. But then, months later, you build that endurance and that stamina that you're like, I actually did this. And you never know what you can accomplish unless you think about it as an option, as like a possibility. Right. And so again, never in a million years, a year and a half ago, 26.2 would never been in my vocabulary. But now saying like, wow, I actually did that. It wasn't the best race I did, but I did it. And now it drives you to actually do it again so that you can actually do it better.
Yeah, they do talk about runner's high.
Yes.
So you both are nodding like that. Yeah, that's a real thing.
It happens. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with the endorphins that kick in, right? I mean, it just kind of keeps you going.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at a good point in our episode to take a break and just, start off with our first half. So, even in the first half, I know we're barely touching the surface talking to you both about triathlons and marathons. Thank you all for joining us for our 4th episode of Season 3. We're talking with Dr. Gina Dapul-Hidalgo and her spouse, Raniel Hidalgo. Feel free to take a quick stretch, refill your water or tea. We'll be right back after this quick break.
Wherever you are is where I wanna be. Where you come along, everything ain't as ugly. You and I both know how cold the world can be, but it's always warm whenever I'm where you are. Trying to act like I ain't got no sign of time, or that it ain't far away from me to get wherever you are. If halfway you get me, that's the sign. You're worth the journey for me. Wherever you are is where I wanna be. When you come along, everything ain't as ugly. You and I both know how cold the world can be, but it's always warm whenever I'm where you are. Who must I be that, darling, you make the time?
Welcome back to Pilipinx in Wellness. You were just listening to the first part of Wherever You Are by Drew Kid. A special shout out goes to DJ Les Talusan out in the DC area who put me on to Drew Kid's music. You've got to check out Les's OPM Sundays that she does with Joel Kizon on Twitch, or Kizon. And I wanted to say OPM, if you don't know already, it stands for Original Filipino Music. So they definitely have good songs that they are original songs composed and produced, arranged in the Philippines. For more information, you can follow Les on Instagram at Les Talusan, LESTALUSAN, Talusan, or Joel at Joel, JOELQUIZ, spelt like quiz for those of you listening. Back to Drew Kid, who's a Filipino-American piano player, composer, arranger, producer from Silver Spring, Maryland, where comedian Dave Chappelle is also from. Wherever You Are features also supporting vocalist Deborah Bond. Published by Afrocentric Asian Music, Phantom Lover Publishing, and recorded by Dunk at Rum Runner Records, Brentwood, Maryland. You can help support Drew Kid by following him on Instagram at Clout City Bird Gang, and I'll have to spell this one out for you. So it's all one word, Clout, Klout with a K, City spelled SITTY, Bird spelled BURD, and Gang, GUANG. You can find his music on most streaming platforms, including Bandcamp, Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Shout out to our Pilipinx and Filipino-American musicians out there laying down the tracks. Returning from our break, we've been talking with power couple Dr. Gina Dapul-Hidalgo and Raniel Hidalgo about triathlons and marathons. Continuing the conversation from our first half, I wanted to talk to you both about gear, because gear is an important part, right, of participating in triathlons and marathons. So I'm sure with Gina, you have to find a particular running shoe that will support these distances. And with Raniel, I'm sure it's more than just having running shoes, since you're doing 3 different ones. So let's take a shot at talking about gear. Who would like to take this?
Sure
one?
thing.
Yeah.
So you said correctly, triathlon does come with a lot of stuff. I will say that to actually get through the race, there's some very basic things, right, that you need to have on you. So to start, when it comes to the swim, make sure that you obviously have a good pair of goggles, okay, number one. And also what you're going to wear is something that they call triathlon shorts to start off. And triathlon shorts are essentially a kind of a hybrid biker short. So if you're familiar with what biker shorts are, they have kind of padding.
Uh-huh.
But a triathlon short will allow you to actually get them wet, right, to be able to swim in them.
Okay.
So at the very least, if you have those two things, that's enough to kind of get you through. However, one thing you might want to also consider is buying a swim wetsuit. There are going to be races that are what they call wetsuit legal, depending on where in the world you're racing.
Okay.
Probably don't have to worry about that in the Philippines. But if, for example, you're in California and this is an ocean race and, Southern California, the water is cold. And depending if you're on the East Coast or anywhere else, depending on the time of year, there's going to be certain temperatures where you are allowed to wear the wetsuit. You don't have to. However, if it's really cold, it's going to be tough to swim, right? So I would say that's something you want to kind of explore.
Really quick,
You don't necessarily,
Daniel, about the wetsuits. Are these different wetsuits than what bodyboarders or surfers?
Yeah, they're going to be different. Made of a thinner material, kind of they call it neoprene, and it allows you to be a little bit buoyant, right, in the water. And they're going to be thinner than surfing wetsuits.
Okay.
Surfing wetsuits, their primary goal is just to keep you warm,
right?
Swimming wetsuits keep you warm, but still allow you to move and kind of move your arms for that freestyle stroke.
Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So, and when it comes to the bike, you need a bike, right? And it could be anything from, a road bike. It could be a time trial bike. You'll see a lot of that in these Ironman races where you're kind of in this kind of aero position.
Okay.
But you can actually bring a hybrid, right? I mean, if you have a bicycle with a couple of gears to get you up a hill with a basket in front, you can race with that as well, right? You just need a bike and a helmet.
Now you said
you will not be able to race without a helmet.
What was the type of bike? A time?
So the one of the more common bikes that you will see at triathlons are called time trial bikes.
Time trial.
Okay? Time trial.
Okay.
Right, and these bikes, if you look at them, they are a lot more aerodynamic.
Yeah.
So if you look at them from the front, you will notice that they're going to be very streamlined when it comes to the design. And another common trait or common characteristic of a time trial bike is instead of holding your handlebars to prop you up, you'll see a lot of the cyclists that are riding that way would be on their elbows, kind of in a plank position, right? That's called an aero position. So that kind of streamlines you to be as quick as you can and not have any kind of drag.
Wow.
I'm geeking out.
No, I didn't realize that that's part of this that contributes to the speed.
It does.
Okay.
It does. And I mean, in the end, you're looking for ways to kind of make life easier, right? And if you can save some time and energy by being a little bit more aerodynamic, you're going to do that.
Yeah.
However, it's not necessary, right? I've seen athletes go in there with mountain bikes, fat bikes with the big fat tires. I've seen them compete in those, right? And depending on what you're comfortable doing, a bike is a bike, right? And then obviously running shoes at the end for the last part of the race.
Yeah. What kind of bike do you have?
So I actually have too many bikes. When it comes to triathlon, I ride a Felt B16. So Felt is kind of a niche bike company. They build a lot of road racing bikes and time trial bikes, and I've had that bike for well over 8 years now, and it's a pretty sturdy thing to use.
Okay. And now for running shoes, what kind of running shoes do you both generally go for? Now I have to put out a disclaimer: we're not endorsed by any particular company. So when people are looking for running shoes, what are important components for you both?
So actually, I would say I was running for my first, how many years using Nikes. And I did my first couple half marathons using Nikes. And as I started to train for my full marathon last year, I realized I probably need something that's made for long distance running. Because not only are you running that actual 26.2, you have to lead up to it. So your shoes have to, get to possibly a couple 100 miles in a few months. So I switched over last year to a company called Brooks. And this is a big, well-known running shoe company. And actually how I heard about it was from the running store. So based on some running stores will like test out your gait. They'll put you on these little things and take a look, are you flat-footed and all this stuff, and be able to recommend something. And you can get a custom soles that go with those shoes. So really all you need are shoes, but good socks. You don't think about socks, but you also need a good pair of running socks so that you don't get blisters and things like that. And it depends. There's different types. If you like a cushioned one, so it's a little thicker, or if you like to run with thinner socks, there's thin versions of it. So yes, shoes, socks. And for those who like to run with music, then you need your some type of music gear, whether it's your phone or pods or
Yeah. Well, how are running socks different from like your average sock? Are there certain like paddings in certain areas or?
Yes, there's cushion more in the arch? Yes, in the arch at the underneath the toe area, but it also cushions it around the middle part of your feet so that you don't get blisters. So it's really made, because if you just use regular socks, anything that goes like this can cause a blister. So it's made to be tightly wrapped around your foot.
Right.
So it's comfortable and prevents those types.
Anything that causes friction, right?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. So gear's a really definitely an essential part of doing these triathlons and marathons. Let's talk about now recovery. So we talked about preparation. We've talked about the experience. We've talked about what you need in terms of gear. Now, what happens post? So what has happened to you both, or what are some lessons that you've learned along the way that you can share with our community?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wish I had a masseuse with me after every long run or every long ride, but we don't have access to someone that's going to give me massages, nor do I want to stress my wife on here. So a key recovery piece of equipment that we have around the house is a foam roller, definitely, along with a rolling stick. And what that's intended to do is to kind of loosen up the leg muscles that you've been punishing for hours on end. And that certainly helps with the recovery, and it reduces the soreness tremendously. And we're able to kind of bounce back within a day or two and continue that training. I didn't start doing that until I started some of the longer distance triathlon training. Even when I was doing marathon training, I didn't know anything about it. But yeah, it's truly something that's required at this point if you want to kind of stay sane and to keep training.
Yes, I would agree. So in the initial parts of, my halves, in the late 20s, I didn't know about the sticks or the foam rollers. So I would be in pain for days, sometimes up to like a week after running a 13.1, because it's just, a lot of trauma to the body. And yeah, maybe you stretch afterwards. You can do a little, stretching before and after. But the foam roller and the stick have really helped so that you can continue going after not only your long runs, but even in between while you're training, doing short runs. And yes, so the stick and the roller have made a huge difference, because if you don't, you'll still recover. It just takes a little bit longer.
And do you have any changes in your diet after, or is it kind of back to normal? Or do you add additional electrolytes, or do any replenishing in the recovery stage?
I would say protein's important again, just for that, for helping to rebuild the muscle. Mm-hmm. And again, you can do that in the form of just building protein shakes, or just making sure you have a good intake of that, especially the day of. And then back to your normal after that.
All right. Now, what about injuries? What are some ways that our community can learn to prevent injuries from happening? What are some of your techniques and strategies?
So for me, it's that IT band syndrome that we talked about a little bit earlier, and really preventing it. Actually, what I'm told by, people in the medical orthopedic field is that it really depends on your shoes.
Okay.
so that if you suffer from this knee pain while you're running, that you may want to either make sure your shoes are still good. They're supposed to last, somewhere between 500 to a couple hundred miles. And if you're above that, then the shoes are no longer going to be as supportive, and then you can get these types of injuries. So this is a common injury for runners. And for me, again, as I experienced it, what got me through it, because I did experience it during one of my half marathon trainings for Philly in 2016. I actually saw a physical therapist and had some PT to get that part of my leg and my knee strengthened. They would roll it. We do a lot of strengthening exercises because it can stop you from really doing the distance that you want to do. But for me at the time, I was like, well, give me whatever needs to happen because I'm finishing this 13.1.
Yeah.
So yes, so PT for some injuries.
Where's the IT band, Gina?
So it's connecting from your hip all the way down to your knee. And so when certain parts of your knee are moving, it causes like this rub. And it doesn't happen to everybody. It really just depends on, I think some of the other things too are when you're running in the same direction and the roads are not straight, right? So if you're running like lopsided and you're always running where one leg is a little higher than the other, that can cause it to happen. So you're kind of told, well, run in the other direction so that you're balancing it out. So yes, it is like a ligament tendon that connects to the knee, and it's really painful for those who get it because it can stop you from running and or walking, but you can kind of push through it.
Yeah, I know, because I've heard that some people avoid running because it's hard on the knees. Like, for example, for me, I was jogging for a while, but then I started to feel pain in my knee. And I'm not sure, like, when you're feeling that, are you supposed to push through it? Are you supposed to reposition? Is there something that you need to change in your gear? I don't know if you've both encountered that, and if so, like how you've overcome that. Yeah, you're nodding like maybe you have.
Yes. So when it started to happen to me during training, that's when I saw an orthopedic surgeon to say, oh, it's okay. I think x-rays might have been done to make sure there was nothing, fractured, because you can get these stress fractures in your feet, your knees, from all of this like constant pressure.
And there's also those that's also a train of thought. Have you heard people that also train or run barefoot? So
I've started to see that trend.
yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with that. I've seen folks in marathons do that every now and then. But I'd be more worried about stepping on a pedal and all of a sudden getting infections.
Or having shoes that are more designed so that it fits more of your natural foot. I've also heard that. What do you normally train on? Do you both train on tracks? Do you train on? Because I'm sure also does that play a role too? Like, do you like to run on sand? Like, what kind?
I wish there was sand.
Running on sand is hard.
Yeah, it's hard.
Some people train on trails.
Right. Yes. I personally like to run on the street.
Okay.
That's where my races are going to be.
Yeah.
Right. So you want to kind of mimic that environment as best as you can. If I had access to a track, I would prefer doing kind of my short runs on that just to kind of get the cardio in. Because, to kind of tie it back to injury, you can actually get injured if you're training for 6 months for these long distance Ironman races. You're likely going to get hurt. And then that's largely from just overuse. Like, I've had knee injuries where, all of a sudden midway through my run, it would just start hurting. And that's when it's okay to just back off a little bit, right? So, Gina mentioned earlier about kind of the schedule for being able to follow. Don't beat yourself up if you miss a day or two. It's okay. Like, if you have to stop for a week, it's okay. You'll be fine. A lot of people start to think they have to push through the pain. But if, for example, you're starting to feel that your knee hurts, just give yourself a day or two to just recover. Use ice, get the swelling down. and just do it again when you're ready.
And then, Gina, you also run on the street as well?
Yes.
Okay, on
yes.
pavement.
So typically, yes, on the street. How we would do it so that we're kind of close to home and is by doing loops.
Mm-hmm.
So you can map out something where you live and do like a 3-mile loop, so that if you have to do 9 and you do that 3 times, or if you're doing, you can make a 4-mile loop from where your house is, and you could drive it, or sometimes now with all our gear, and watch, we forgot about the watch. But sometimes that will tell us, you just ran 1 mile. So then you keep in your mind, okay, well, this distance to that distance. And it allows you to kind of stay close to home, should you need to, come home. Or when we train, I'd put a little table and have my hydration out there so that I can kind of come by and every couple miles just like have that there. If I didn't have it, and have drinks and stuff on my belt.
Plus, you're close to a bathroom.
Yes, bathroom. I was going to say that.
And you've mainly run on flat ground. Do you do inclines or?
Well, so actually we live in a very hilly neighborhood.
Uh-huh.
So yes, it's good to train. Sometimes the races will actually tell you what the elevation is.
Right.
You can see maps on if there's going to be some hills, or if there's a really big one at mile 9 that you can prepare for it. So when you train on hills, it makes it easier if the race is actually flat.
Right.
Like, okay.
Totally. Yeah. All right. Let's actually veer into the importance of physical wellness and its place within our Filipinx community. So how do you two personally see participating in triathlons or marathons as an important part of not only your own personal wellness journey, but a physical activity that folks in our Filipinx or Filipino community can adopt? So we'll start with that question.
So, really there's so many benefits to physical activity, to running, to cycling, to any of these endurance sports. You actually can decrease your risk of, heart disease, decrease your risk of high blood pressure. So if you have high blood pressure, sometimes by getting active, you're actually able to lower your blood pressure and potentially not even need medicines, depending on how you respond. And I know that diabetes runs very commonly in our community. So this type of exercise, aerobic exercise, really does decrease the risk of developing it. And interestingly, which when I was doing my research, it actually decreases your risk of different cancers. So if you are active, things like bladder, breast, colon, esophageal, kidney, lung, and stomach cancers are lessened because of aerobic exercise. And this is really interesting because for us, this is how we would find that it's helpful, but it actually improves your memory and your cognition. So on the thinking, we're like sharper when we do all this, reduces your risk of dementia, including Alzheimer's. And on a daily basis, this actually improves your quality of life. You have better mood, better energy, decreased anxiety and depression. For those when you do these training, you actually sleep better. So you sleep really well those nights. And then you're also able to, either have weight loss or stabilize or reduce your weight gain. And because of the impact of the running and the training, you actually also improve your bone health. So all of these are really positive benefits to doing some type of aerobic exercise, physical exercise. Again, keeping in mind that you do it within the boundaries of what your body's able to do.
And if I could piggyback off of that, I want to add to the benefits of kind of, the mental benefits as well, right? So, exercise is for us, at least for me, is a great way of releasing stress, right? At the end of the day, if I go for just a quick 30-minute run, it's an opportunity to reflect, right, on some of the things that were challenging and just kind of clear your head, where you can just leave everything out there. And it's just a great way of being able to kind of, find that mental and spiritual balance even, and just being able to kind of use that as an outlet, right, to just leave everything out.
I know that earlier you were saying that it's also helpful because when you get home, like Raniel is energized to do the laundry or help out the house. I guess it also helps get your house in order.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think also one important component that you also mentioned when we were talking about preparation or training was your diets, right? And that also in our community, that contributes to a lot of what we're seeing. Maybe Dr. Dapul-Hidalgo, if you could right, the high blood pressure, the diabetes, it's related to stress, it's related to diets. And so having, Rani, you just mentioned, so having this physical release and this regular routine also combats a lot of what we're seeing in our community.
Yes, no, for sure. And, I know Jordan and Nelson talked about it at last month's podcast, where this was a form of, they would like to work, and that all of this really helps mentally, right? Like you're able to not only be physically better and well, but also mentally. So a lot of that, it all goes together. It just gets tied in, right? When you're stressed, you may take some habits like overeating or having a, box of ice cream or something, where these lead to habits where if you can decrease your stress and you eat a little bit healthier, or you eat the amount that you need to train, you're burning those calories. And all of this is just a big cycle of wellness, of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like once you start it, it's this journey of, wow, it's going to affect everything, in a positive manner.
Right. It pretty much affects your whole ecosystem in a sense.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. No, thank you. I know we just have listeners, that are all over the diaspora throughout the world. So that's important to really hear about how this physical wellness or participating in these cardio exercises can really improve and help them move towards optimal health. I know also maybe, is it easy to access the gear that you mentioned, Raniel? I know that there's also people from different income brackets, right, that might be listening. Do they have to feel like they have to get spend so much money to participate in these things? I knew, yeah.
That's a very good question. It is easy to feel intimidated because of the fact that, you'll see triathletes on television or even on the internet with all of these gear, right? But when it comes down to it, I would say the most expensive thing that you need to bring to the table is a bike, right? So if you can get to the point where you have access to a bicycle, you're pretty much all the way there. You don't necessarily have to swim with swim goggles. You don't need a wetsuit, right? I mean, all of that stuff. For example, you don't even need to buy a wetsuit. There are companies out there that you can rent one for the day, right? So there are certainly options if you wanted to try the sport without having to invest a lot of income, right, into starting.
And for folks that don't have pools in their yards, do you also use community pools or?
Oh, certainly. Absolutely. That's like I said earlier, if there is a community pool that you have access to, and as long as it's long enough, at least 25 meters, right, is kind of the basic distance that you can use and swim back and forth as long as you need, and that's enough for you to kind of get started.
Awesome. I'm curious to know, what are your personal and professional goals when it comes to triathlons and marathons, if you have any? Where would you two like to take it next? Maybe, Raniel, do you want to come and do triathlons on the West Coast where you're from, or another city in the U.S., globally, getting your twins involved? Where do you both want to take this next?
So for me, the cool thing about any race, whether it's a marathon or a triathlon, is you can turn it into a family event. In other words, it's an opportunity to see different cities, to see different countries, and a great way of spending time together as a family. So my goal would ultimately, when our daughters are old enough to do a lot more traveling, is to kind of, give ourselves an opportunity to see the world and to see different parts of that country through races, right? And being able to support each other in that.
So my goal would be eventually to do the New York City Marathon. And so this one for most of us is a lottery. And so I've actually tried 2 years in a row now and did not get it. And, my reason for doing it is I'm from New York, from New Jersey, and Raniel did the New York City Marathon in 2018. And we actually had family in almost all the boroughs. So our family in Brooklyn came out with their signs. We met him in Manhattan. I don't know if anyone was in Queens. But yes, so my goal is to eventually, at some point, do the New York City Marathon, even if it's like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And yes, but my real goal in the future, as Raniel was alluding to earlier, is to do half marathons, because it's a much trainable distance, to not spend that many months, but, 2 months or so, 3 months, train for a half and travel the world. So I had a little bug after the full marathon, and I was looking at, maybe we can go to this country and, try a half marathon or something like that. But yes, it's to make it so that it's an experience and something also to look forward to, so we can learn the culture and, kind of do two things at once while we're there.
Do your kids have any interest in like running or swimming or cycling now that you both do it, or are they totally like just your cheerleaders on
it? They've ran
We've done one
or two
5K
together. I think it's a struggle for them at this point. They love to cheer.
Yeah.
They love to be involved with making signs for mommy when she's doing her race. But we try to get them into these activities as well, which is biking around the neighborhood.
Yeah,
it's an adventure.
And swimming in the pool. That's a life skill. As much as I don't even know it, it's a good skill to learn.
Totally. I always tell my runner friends that I like to cheer too, so. Now, within the world of triathletes and marathon runners, are there other athletes out there that inspire you both? So if so, who are they and where are they located and why?
So I don't follow the professional athlete circles with triathlon. I did get inspired by, believe it or not, Gordon Ramsay. So I don't know if you knew this,
the chef?
But the chef Gordon Ramsay competed in the full Ironman distance years ago. Yeah, so like in the World Championship in Kona. So he documented that. It was a great documentary to watch him do that. But he was certainly one of my greater motivations in trying to do this thing. He's probably 10 times busier than me, and if he could pull it off, right, I can certainly give it a shot.
So for me, I don't have any like professional athletes either. I would say it really is like family, friends, and colleagues. One of the interesting things that had piqued my interest is one of my titas had run the New York City Marathon. And when we had gone to her house, we saw her picture up there with the time. And it's, at the end of these things, they take your picture so you can always buy the photos afterwards. And so I was like, wow, she did this when she had, 2 kids. And that to me was inspiring. I was like, wow, my tita ran this full marathon.
Multiple times.
She did New York City. I don't even know how many times. And, Raniel, when he was doing all his runs, there I was cheering on for many years. Really, that kind of slowly inspired me. But really, it's really the real people who we know. We've got friends in New Jersey who, one of them has just recently done Boston, London. And, for depending on what your reason for doing the races are, she actually raised money for cancer. So she did a fundraiser for Dana-Farber. And there's so many benefits that if you want to take this further or you have a cause that you're really passionate about, that you can actually contribute to that. And that's what inspires me. It's people like us who are parents, who are, friends and family. We're like, wow, you do this, and it can be done. We're normal people who are, working and have kids, and just find this as something that motivates us.
And what about motivation? Like, okay, you just actually ended with that. So I mean, there must be days where you're like, I don't feel like running today or biking today. So for our community, even like to just get them started, right? And in like training and like running or cycling or, swimming in your case, Raniel, or, what do you use for motivation when it comes to?
So
Yeah.
I'll take a stab at that. So I look at the beginning of my journey. My initial motivation at the very beginning was to just complete it, just to say when I did it, right? Because if you look at it for the first time and you kind of have to put all three sports together, and for example, I was intimidated by the swim. My motivation at the time was just to figure it out, to figure out how to get past the barriers and to understand that, okay, if I could swim one lap from one end to another, and I could swim from there to back, and I'm not fully winded, wow, what if I just keep going and just kind of figuring out and solve these things? So initially that was my motivation. After so many years of doing it, my motivation now is, how do I get better, right? How can I go a little bit faster on my next bike ride? Or how can I adjust the way I pull in my swim technique to kind of gain a little bit more momentum? So there's always kind of room for improvement. Sometimes that's not enough to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I will say I am kind of a normal guy, and I'll sleep in and I'll miss a training session. But again, it's okay. you can do that.
Okay.
But that for me, it's kind of finding ways to kind of do better across the different sports.
Yes. So I would say that motivation now would be, to push yourself to do something that you don't think you could have ever done, and to grow from that experience, right? And to me also, this is an interesting one. It's to show the girls that if I put my mind to something, that you can actually accomplish it. And it doesn't matter how far off it may seem, whether it's a race or, a 5K. And it just shows an example to anybody, right? That you're like, wow, you started off doing 5Ks. And so now the motivation is to, grow as a person, as an individual, and to be the healthiest that we can be, in order to, just live life to the fullest.
Nice. Now, do you ever train with communities or socially? Like, do you also join runner circles or training groups, or do you ever join gyms also for external motivation, or do you both prefer to just train solo?
So I was lucky enough to find these folks here. This is a DC Triathlon Club. As I stated earlier in your podcast, the triathlon community is a very welcoming community. And I've met a number of other local fathers as well, right? And family men and women that you can train with, cycle with, run with. And that's the cool thing about these endurance sports. So there's always opportunities to meet folks, right? And because they all have similar goals, and we're all struggling through the same, going through the same struggles and overcoming them. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of communities. For me personally, having access to my local club helped inspire me and continue to keep doing it.
So in my case, I actually tend to train by myself. I think Raniel maybe has come, as we said, maybe with like one run, but sometimes it grows. But for me, it's really a time, like these moments, to be in my own head and to experience nature So when I do my short runs, I actually don't use music. So I kind of just look around and I'm being present with everything. And when I do my long runs, that's when I have all my, R&B, hip hop, and pop music playing for the 3 hours I'm running. So in that case, but however, if you are interested in doing this with a community, as I said, there's some like local running stores where you get your gear and they have these run groups. They meet up. They do like every Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. or something like that. The gyms also have it. I know some of the gyms will also set a time where you can meet up and run. And yes, these same groups are those that organize races. So for example, in our county, we have a county running club. So they organize a bunch of these 5Ks, 10K races throughout the year. So they're the same people that you would see while you train, but they're also the ones who host the events. So it can be a really a community. Another thing that I'm a part of, but it's not in person, is actually like a Facebook running group. So when people run their marathons or their 5Ks or half marathons, they'll post about their experience, and it kind of motivates you to say, oh, wow, somebody did it, and that's how they did it. So you can learn from their experience, So yes, there are ways to make it a community. And I guess personally, I just like to do it by myself.
Yeah, I mean, some people like to exercise solo. Some people like to, exercise with other people. So yeah, no, totally. Both are okay. Before we close, we always like to ask our guests if you have other wellness practices that you'd like to share. I saw in your bios that you submitted that both of you like to do yoga. So what type of yoga do you both do? And then Raniel, you also mentioned in your bio that you do mountain biking and weightlifting. So what do you do for self-care that I might not have mentioned that others might find inspirational?
Okay, so for yoga, I do vinyasa yoga, which Raniel also does. Actually, interestingly, during my marathon training, I didn't have time to do that as much. So we did a lot of yin yoga. So yin yoga is where you do a lot of stretching and you're in the pose for a while. So that helped actually with recovery. So, I'd run on Saturday and maybe do a yin yoga with these apps that we have, sometimes we're streaming, on a Sunday night. So you can set your apps to do 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and just kind of wind down and stretch that way. But yes, no, I love yoga. That also, similar to how I was explaining with the running, allows me to be present and kind of, definitely my form of wellness. The other things I would say that are very important to me, at least, are going to church spiritually. Like that for me is, for us as a family, we go every Sunday. A big part of our community is our church. And I like to treat myself to massages every couple months. I would say, okay, it's been a stressful couple months. Let's, get a massage, or my sister would get me a gift certificate and I'd use that. So those are definitely my forms of wellness.
Yeah. So I will double down on yoga. I love yoga. I mean, that's something I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. I think it's a great way of just meditation, another form of stress release, and it allows the body to really recover, especially when doing a lot of endurance. Mountain biking is definitely one of the more extreme yet exciting things that I've been doing lately. I look at that as, if for any of your audience that has ever done any kind of skiing or any kind of, similar activities, mountain biking gives you that thrill.
Adrenaline sports, yeah.
It's got a lot of adrenaline, but you have to climb up the mountain to get there, right? So you actually get a really, really good workout out of doing that. And plus you're in nature most of the time. You're kind of out in here we're in the forest or we're out in the woods. And then when it comes to weight training, again, that's kind of cross training. I'm in my mid 40s now. So strength training is very important as we're getting older. So I kind of mix that in throughout the endurance training just to kind of keep the bones and muscles in good shape.
Do you also weight train, Gina?
No, not per se, but there are some exercises where, I'll pick up a few weights and do some push-ups because I do need to build my upper body for the yoga stuff too.
Right. Yeah, totally. Planks also help for that. Yeah.
Yes.
As we begin to close, how can our community find you if they have additional questions?
So for me, you can find me on my website, Dapul, Dapul, allergy.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And when I do have a Instagram and YouTube, I will let you know.
Similarly, on my end, I'm on Facebook, Raniel Hidalgo, also on LinkedIn. And for any of the athletes that are watching, if you're familiar with the Strava app, I'm also on there as well. If you want to find and connect with me, and I'm happy to share stats and talk about all of the things that we discussed today.
Yay. Thank you, Gina and Raniel, for talking to our community about triathlons and marathons. We're so honored to have featured you both on our podcast for our community to learn more about these two worlds. I know I personally learned more from each episode, and then also especially from you two. We're excited to witness how your journeys continue to unfold and are here to support you as your Pilipinx in Wellness family. And Dr. Dapul-Hidalgo, we can't wait to personally invite you back next year to talk to our community about allergies, asthma, and immunology. I know I personally am like, can you please help me with mine?
Happy to help.
Best wishes to your private clinic that you're opening up. There's so much to unpack in these areas that I'm excited to also explore. And to our community, look out for our next episode. In August, we will be talking about the third topic in our physical wellness trilogy, House Dancing and Health, with international instructor and famous house dancer Jordi Santiago. The episode will air during our Wellness Wednesdays on August 16. As we close, we'd like to acknowledge once again our guest speakers, Dr. Gina Dapul-Hidalgo and her husband, Raniel Hidalgo, our social media strategist, Kathleen Torrio, our graphic designer and beat maker for our opening and closing track, Ritchie, Drew Kid, reigning from Silver Spring, Maryland, for consent to use your track Wherever You Are, featuring Deborah Bond, that you heard a piece of during our break. Our advisors, Allison De La Cruz, Rian De Los Reyes, and Safo Teologo. Our community partners is Filipino-American Life, SoCal Filipinos, and Trek Table, and all of our community members for your shares and support. As always, we'll share more about our guest speakers' offerings on our Instagram stories and highlights for permanent access with any of their upcoming events. Be sure to follow us at Pilipinx in Wellness on Instagram, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and on Twitter at Pilipinx, the letter N, followed by the letters N and S. Don't forget to continue to hit the subscribe button on our Pilipinx in Wellness YouTube channel. Thank you always for believing in us. Be well, everyone. Continue to take care of yourselves and each other. Durugid na nga salamat.
Salamat.
Thank you.